So when the July days in Madrid, when the anarchists and the communists fought with each other inside the Republican zone, when there needed to be a scapegoat for that fighting, they turned on this tiny little party that everyone hated called the POUN. And they became fascist apologists, clerical dog collarists, running dogs of the international bourgeois conspiracy, and so on. And these individuals were hunted down with extreme ruthlessness, and all those that were found were shot and killed without any sort of a tribunal or a trial at all. The leader of this particular sect was tortured to death by the communist secret police inside the Republican zone. These incidents traumatized Orwell and made him a sort of critical figure of parts of the left on the left. We look back today through rose-tinted spectacles to a degree. When he wrote this sort of material, the world was still very much in the balance, and the forces against which he was inveighing in part, novelistically, could well have come to power. It's also interesting to note that most of Orwell's books are not forgotten today, but would have been partly forgotten had he not written The Fable Animal Farm about the Bolshevik coup, and had he not written 1984 about the texture and nature and what novelists call sense data of living under a totalitarian left dictatorship. One of the interesting things to note is that Eastern European intellectuals, particularly in societies like Hungary and Poland and Czechoslovakia and elsewhere, all regarded this book as essentially a factual commentary on their lives. So close was it an imaginary and yet projected identification with what it was like to live under Ceausescu's Romania, for example. There are also extraordinary parallels between reality and this novel, which, don't forget, was written in 1948, which is why when he needed a title, he inverted it, and it became 1984. Now, in Ceausescu's Romania, almost every telephone conversation was listened to. And if you ran to the country out from the outside, the Securitate, the all-pervasive secret police, would break the line, very crude, pre-digital connections, and they would put in a new block of tape to listen to the message again. And you had to ring again, and then you had to ring again, and they would block the line, and you had to ring again, and so on. Because everything was being listened to, even when it wasn't. Every cafe table had a microphone underneath it, but 80% of them didn't work. But people couldn't take the chance that it wasn't one of the 20% that happened to be working. There's also an extraordinary parallelism between the Ceausescu regime and this novel. Well, two parallelisms actually. One is the endless production of works by the great leader. Ceausescu's collected volumes ran to 15, to 20, to 30 volumes. Of course, he never wrote a word of it. They were all written for him by communist scribes and apparatchiks. Hodja in Albania had a similarly unread Calvinist library that was produced for him by tame scholars who had been shot or tortured to death or their families killed and their family owned bulldozed so that they'd never existed, hadn't they actually produced this sort of material. The other parallelism is the pyramids. In this novel, the party builds four enormous ministries. Ministry of Peace, which is for war. The Ministry of Love, which is for torture and oppression of the citizen into the purity of Insof, the ideology of the dictatorship, which is called the Ministry of Love because it's the inversion of that. Then there's other ministries. Ministry of Plenty, which deals with economic affairs, usually involving endless brain statistical announcements of pig iron production, which all of it was a hilarious joke from Eastern Bloc dictatorships, but actually came quite close to the truth. Now, in Romania, Ceausescu ordered large pyramids to be built in the capital. And these were built and were observable when the regime fell in a coup organised by ex-communists and other factors to form what was called the National Salvation Front at that time. Do you remember the scenes on television? When Ceausescu's on the podium, surrounded by the Securitate, many of whom were orphans. Many of them were taken from orphanages directly by the Ceausescu family and impregnated with the idea that they were related to him, that Ceausescu and his ubiquitous wife, who was always with him on all occasions, were their mother and father. That's one of the reasons psychologically why the Securitate government fought to the end, unlike many of the other Eastern Bloc dictatorship servants who gave up when the going got rather rough. There's that incredible moment which is history as it's observed, when Ceausescu's orating about the dangers of fascism, the dangers of revanchism, the dangers of counter-terrorism, the dangers of a new bourgeois elite arriving in Romania, and he suddenly stops. And the Securitate around him start to get worried because the crowd is getting restive. And the crowd is working out that if just a few of them move, nothing will happen. But if they all move together, the security police don't know what to do. And there's a moment when Ceausescu's looking, do I step back from the microphone? Do I continue my anti-Western rant? Do I go into the helicopter with the Securitate? And he suddenly decides to go with the Securitate, and they disappear. And usually, if ever a regime's like that's in trouble, there's a music cut in the television, and a ballet starts, you know, or something like that. That's always used to happen in the Soviet Union. Whenever somebody was being purged, or there was something, a moment going on, a famous feature film would appear, you know, just to fill the gap. Just like chipping the colour, basically, in Soviet terms. It'd just be put up, you know. But the Romanian television just allowed it to run. And you could see the Ceausescu's running across the top of the roof, surrounded by Securitate who had their weapons out by then. And they got into the helicopter and went off, by which time the crowd, or mob, if you like, had broken into the bottom of the building and was coming up the building. And by then, the whole structure was swaying. Later that day, of course, the Securitate got on top of many of the buildings and started firing down on the people. And many of them were determined to bring back the regime. Now, this novel is interesting because it radicalizes certain elements of communist rule. One of the ideas that in some ways has got forgotten about in many treatments of the novel, and filmic and theatrical treatments like the Peter Cushing one and like the John Hurt one and that sort of thing, can't really deal with this. And this is the language the party creates, called INSOC. This is this all-purpose, jabbering, ideological Marxist-Leninist language, sometimes referred to as duck speak. Duck speak is the idea that you crack away, and your conscious brain is not really involved because your response to everything is a pre-formatted form of ideology. If you remember one of the dictionary makers who befriends him, he's called Syme, in the Grubby Canteen where they all have their dinners, in the Ministry of Truth, which of course is to propagate lies on behalf of the regime and to rewrite the Times so that everyone is being purged, have the right place, and if somebody is purged, oh no, an unperson. You person in INSOC, Newspeak, and you have to go through the records and make sure that it's all filed so that there's no relationship with them, so that you can never be accused of thought criminality by virtue of the fact they exist. Every bit of spare paper that relates to an unperson, somebody done away with, you put in the memory hole, which goes down into the furnace, which is everywhere and ubiquitous behind these pipes, this little grill. Just like a sort of waste disposal, really. But the idea is it's waste disposal of all the lives who are being rewritten continuously so that the current reality fits in with the party view at any particular time. The party has two sections. The inner party, which wears black and has special privileges. The inner party can turn the telly screen off. Like that screen back there, every apartment, every room has a screen. But you can't turn it off, and it watches you as you watch it. So it's two-way. Yeah. And O'Brien, of course, in a famous scene in the second section of the book, can turn it off, because he's in the inner party. Most people, the TV, rather than at the end of the room, is in the centre of the room on a wall, so it can look down on there. And suddenly it can instruct you, citizen, in appropriate behaviour. Everyone, like in Mao's China at the beginning of the day, in 1984, by Orwell, has to do physical jerks. You have to do physical exercises at the beginning of the day to coordinate yourself for the coming struggle and for the commitment to socialism, which will occur throughout all of the hours before you go back to bed again. Another interesting insight is the relationship that people have with their children. Orwell prefigures the world of bourgeois chaos where parents are frightened to discipline their own children, and which we increasingly see in liberal humanist societies. The parents are preyed upon by the young. One of the first and great scenes is with the Parsons family, who live just up the corridor in the block, because the Parsons boy is a terror. He accuses everyone of being, you're a thought criminal! He says, you're a nasty little vanguard against the proletariat elite! He screams that at everyone he meets. And he's got a pop gun. He says, you're going to burn, you're going to burn, you're going to the camps, you're going down the sulphide, blah! And his mother is sort of terrified of him, because to discipline him is to engage in the possibility of a counter-revolutionary act. So he knows that he's got his parents where he wants them by this endless sort of young pioneers brigading sort of behaviour, And it's a way of corralling the old generation